We are excited to present tonight's webinar, which is applying to talent-based programs. And I would like to introduce our amazing speakers for this evening. The first speaker is Laura Shadler. She is a writer, an educator, an admissions consultant with over 20 years of experience helping students gain acceptance to their dream schools. And she has worked with hundreds of students and clients focusing on college preparation, undergrad and graduate admissions, application strategy, and essay writing, ultimately guiding students to find their unique academic and professional path. And our other speaker tonight is Sajel Ulrich. And Sajel brings over 9 years of experience in academic tutoring, test prep, and college counseling. A graduate of NYU's Tisch School of the Arts with a dual background in neuroscience and acting. She understands firsthand the challenges of navigating both competitive academic and artistic pathways. Sajel also specializes in guiding students through the college application process with particular expertise in essay composition and helping students get into their dream schools. So I will go ahead and pass it off to Laura and Sajel in just a moment. But before I do, if you have any questions at all during the presentation, I'd like to direct you to the bottom of the screen where you'll see a Q&A box. If you can pop your questions in there throughout the presentation, we'll have time at the end to answer as many of those as we can. So without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Laura and Sajel.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lorraine. So excited to be here talking about some of my favorite things to help students work on and apply to. So our overview for tonight's webinar is we'll obviously be covering a range of these types of programs. So we'll be talking about admission to acting and drama programs, musical theater, dance, creative writing, film, and music. So we'll be covering, what these schools are looking for. You want to think of it as you have your regular application and then you have your creative application, right? So you're also weaving in those auditions and portfolios, creative supplements, depending on the program. We'll be talking about how to research and choose the right programs. There's a wide range, as you'll see, and depending on your goals and your areas of expertise, right? Your plan will look a little bit different. There's also a big difference in the deadlines, the requirements, and just the overall admission timeline that you'll be thinking about for these programs. We'll also talk a little bit about strategies for how to best showcase your talent, and perhaps most importantly, how to start preparing right now, because a lot of this takes a lot of legwork and you'll need to start well before the applications are actually due. So we will kick it off with just how creative admissions differs in general, and I will hand it over to Sajel for that.
Thank you, Laura. Also, so excited to be here talking about our favorite creative applications. But when we're talking about creative or talent-based admissions, I think the first distinction is that we're really talking about a dual process here. So you're applying not just to a college, but also to a department or conservatory within that college. So that means that you're going to be evaluated in two parallel ways. The first is academically, like everybody else, by the admissions office, based on your GPA, your essays, and your recommendations. The second is that artistic review, and that's often led by faculty or program directors who are often professional artists themselves. So it is truly double the work and often double the timeline. You'll notice that these programs tend to have, as Laura mentioned earlier, or staggered deadlines. For example, your pre-screened videos might be due in November, even if the school's general application isn't due until January. That catches a lot of students off guard, especially if they haven't planned ahead. One kind of lesser known detail as well is that faculty-led interviews or reviews can make the process feel a lot more subjective. And it's important to note that your audition and your portfolio isn't just about checking the boxes. It's not just about the technical skill, it's about fit. So faculty are looking for teachability, artistic perspective, and whether they can really see you thriving in their program's specific culture. Also, lots of schools use separate separate submission portals. Some examples could be Slide Room or Accepted, which means that you'll be uploading your creative materials, your essays, and sometimes even paying an additional artistic review fee. These systems don't always sync with the main application, so keeping a detailed spreadsheet of each school's requirements is really essential, and also making sure you're cross-referencing the school's website and any applicant portals to make sure you've got everything together. Something else I've also seen, and this is kind of where experience matters, is how students often feel like they have to split themselves into two pieces, their academic self and their artistic self. And I think in reality, admissions committees are looking for students who can bridge the two. They want to see that your creativity informs your academic curiosity and vice versa. So, for example, a student who can talk about how acting improved their public speaking or how writing poetry shaped their sense of empathy, those students are really going to stand out as whole integrated people and not, again, just performers checking the boxes. So kind of just to recap here, while it's, more complex, it is also a chance to show multiple dimensions of who you are academically, artistically, and personally. So I encourage you all to take it in stride. With that, we're going to move on to BFA versus BA as degrees and what those differences mean. This is a big question students ask me, and this is really about how you want to train and what kind of college experience you're looking for. So to start with the BFA, this is a conservatory style program. It's immersive, it's hands-on, it's performance driven. Would say it's about 70 to 80% of your coursework in your dedicated art form, whether that's acting, dance, film, or music, with very few electives. You're in classes, you're in rehearsals, studio, production, a lot of the week, and you're often learning directly from working artists. And it can be very, very intense, but rewarding if you are the person who loves living your art every day. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have a BA, and this is a Bachelor of Arts. This is a little broader, a little bit more flexible. It blends your artistic study with other academic interests that allows you to double major perhaps or explore different fields. So you might spend half your time in your major and the rest you might spend in other disciplines like psychology or business or writing, whatever sparks your curiosity. I think the biggest misconception is that one path is better than the other. And again, I think they're just different. And it really depends on what type of program, what type of college lifestyle you want. The BFA offers more of that deep focused artistic training, whereas the BA offers more breadth and exploration. And I think it comes down to your learning style and your goals. So if you are that student who wants the intensive daily training and they want to plan to perform professionally, the BFAs may be more aligned with your goals. But if you're super multi-passionate or you're still discovering how your art form fits into your bigger picture and you have interests in pursuing an academic discipline as well, I think the BA gives you a little bit more room to grow. With that, we're going to dive into some specifics here. So the first kind of discipline we'll be tackling is our acting/drama programs. Interchangeable, mean the same thing. It's important to realize that with these drama programs, you're applying to something that's more akin to like a professional training studio than a traditional major. So again, you're not just being evaluated by admissions officers, you're auditioning for those faculty directors, coaches, working actors, and you are also auditioning to be part of a cohort. So it's about how you fit into that larger ensemble. Almost every program requires a two-step audition process. This is a general note, and please make sure you're doing your due diligence to double check every single school because they do differ. But schools like Carnegie Mellon, BU, University of Michigan all require pre-screens that open in the early fall, and then the callback weekends are as early as December and January. Programs like NYU Tisch or UCLA are structured differently, but the principle is the same, and the process does start earlier than the regular application deadlines. There's also kind of the logistical side. Again, programs use different platforms, so be cognizant of that. And most auditions require 2 contrasting monologues, 1 classical and 1 contemporary, and some even include an interview or a short workshop. Schools like NYU Tisch and DePaul often use even a conversation to just gauge your personality and curiosity to see if you're coachable, collaborative, and not just talented. We'll dive into some sample programs now. So these are some of the top examples of different drama programs, what they look like. And I think the kind of biggest thing to note is do your research and know that each school and each program has its own unique personality. NYU Tisch is large. It's a well-known BFA program with lots of different studio training, particular based on technique. So it's like a studio system that some studios are dedicated to Meisner, one is dedicated to Strasberg, one is dedicated to Atlantic. So it's very much a technique-based system. So you have to be okay if you're attending Tisch to dive really deep for your first 2 years or so into one technique. And at that point, you can potentially switch studios. Carnegie Mellon is sort of the opposite scale. It's smaller, it's conservatory style, very focused. There's more of a classical emphasis in the material. It's very rigorous, very performance driven, and students spend nearly all of their time in training. At USC, you have a choice between the BFA or the BA track, and it's a great fit for students who are interested in film and TV, screen acting, because of obviously the proximity to Hollywood, strong industry connections, and there is a bit more of a commercial bent to the program style. Boston University blends kind of the intense conservatory training with academic depth. So students often study abroad at RADA, Lambda in London, which makes it appealing for those who are drawn to classical performance. And then we have UCLA's theater, film, and television program, which is technically a BA, but it actually functions more like a BFA-BA hybrid, which is really cool. You still get a significant amount of studio time, performance time, but you also have flexibility to take courses across the university. Finally, we have University of Michigan, and this offers a pretty balanced BFA. There's a lot of emphasis on vocal and movement training, ensemble-based work, and a really, really strong sense of community. Consistently one of the most competitive acting programs and has a really, really strong alumni network. And something you want to think about is how you're going to have a community after you graduate. College is just the beginning, especially if you're an artist. So that's something to consider as well. Moving on to some application tips. So when it comes to your acting applications, I'd like you to think about the word intentionality. So everything you submit should feel really specific and unique to you. For monologues, you want to pick contrasting pieces, one classical and one contemporary, but again, check the requirements, please. Sometimes they're more specific even than that, but also aim for something less expected. Schools see the same Shakespeare and Tennessee Williams monologues hundreds of times. So choosing something lesser known can really make you stand out as long as it still feels authentic to your age and experience. Most of my students who are doing acting and drama and dance are working with the coach or trusted mentor, which can be really helpful. It's not meant to over polish your performances, but you want to be speaking these out loud. You absolutely want to put yourself in the practice mode, have a routine, and make sure you're refining the clarity, the emotion, the presence. Faculty can really tell when you've done that prep work, and it will also allow you to come into your auditions and be spontaneous and responsive in the moment. For self-taping, simplicity wins. So we want a clean backdrop, we want natural light, we want clear audio. If possible, you can invest in a ring light or softbox setup. You can easily get those on Amazon. And always check your eye line. So where you're looking makes a big difference. We don't want to be looking directly into the barrel of the camera or the webcam or whatever you're using like I am now. You want to look slightly off to the side so you make sure that eye line is still clear and visible and your face is in the frame, but that you are not looking directly at the camera. Also make sure you take time to research each school's training approach. So again, whether they emphasize Meisner method or Stanislavski, and that will help you target the programs that align with how you want to work. Finally, be ready for an interview component. They're not just testing your acting again. They want to know who you are as a thinker, a creator. They want you to talk about your process potentially, the stories that move you, and even the causes and cultural issues that you care about. Schools want artists who are engaged with the world and not just performers. Let's take a look at some sample supplementary materials. So a lot of this we kind of already went over, but again, the pre-screen asked for 2 short monologues for Carnegie Mellon, 1 classical, 1 contemporary, both under 90 seconds. So make sure you're looking at a cut that works for you. And you're also looking for contrast, you're looking for authenticity. There's also an optional about you video, which is really not optional, so definitely do that. It's your chance to let them see who you are outside of your performer mode, and you can showcase your humor, your curiosity, your energy, your personality. You'll also have a resume and a headshot, plus a short written statement about what draws you to storytelling and performance. And this essay doesn't have to sound academic. They really do want to hear your genuine voice and your reasoning and what draws you to your art form. And if you make it past the pre-screens, you'll be invited to an in-person or virtual callback. And this usually includes a movement component, improv, and a brief faculty interview. And they're assessing your presence here, how you listen, take direction, how you collaborate. And yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's exciting and it's a great prep for your professional future. Cool. We're going to move on to musical theater now. So for musical theater, we're taking everything that we talked about with acting, and then we're layering in 2 more disciplines, singing and dancing. These are our triple threat programs, and they're among the most competitive majors to apply to. Most musical theater degrees are BFAs, which means you get daily training in all of those areas, acting, voice, and movement. But some schools like UCLA or UCI offer BA options that are a bit more flexible academically. Again, same thing as acting. A lot of the programs start with the pre-screen, often in that November timeframe, and then we move on to those in-person and virtual callbacks. One thing I think that's unique about musical theater auditions is that they're jointly reviewed by the theater and music faculty. So your artistry is evaluated both from the dramatic and technical lens. So we don't want to just think about ourselves as singers. We want to think about ourselves as, okay, how can we tell a story through song and movement? Can the student do more of that crafting and narrative building beyond just the vocal element? So they want to look for that emotional connection. They're looking for students who make bold choices and again, bring truth to the music and not just hit those high notes. Moving on to some sample programs. So you'll see a lot of familiar programs here, and that's because we have overlap in a lot of the most competitive programs between acting and musical theater. So University of Michigan, again, a really top exceptional program with great voice acting and dance training, and again, strong alumni connections on Broadway and in TV. NYU has the new studio on Broadway, and this is a conservatory style BFA within the university, which means you're getting that intensive training along with that liberal arts curriculum. Carnegie Mellon keeps things more small, and it's only a handful of students per class. So the environment feels very personalized and very focused on professional readiness. At Boston Conservatory, the emphasis is more contemporary repertoire and innovation. So students are encouraged to explore more modern musical styles alongside traditional theater. UCI is one of the few BA programs that feels like a hybrid. So you get the strong training, but with academic flexibility and options to double major. And then Texas State is kind of an example of a program that's rising quickly in reputation, and it's known for its strong mentorship and career preparation. I think the thing to note again is that there's no one path to success, and all these schools have different training philosophies. And a great thing to do is to try and shadow, definitely take those in-person tours, talk to people, talk to current students, see if you can get any reviews of what it's like to be in the program, and that will give you that insider knowledge. Great, moving on to some application tips here. So I would say that musical theater applications are about balance. They're about showing who you are as a singer, as an actor, and a dancer individually, and then also how those pieces kind of function together. So for your songs, you want to again choose contrasting pieces, this time one up-tempo and one ballad that shows a bit more storytelling and vocal range. Faculty are a lot more interested here in the connection and interpretation of the music. And whenever possible, pick material that is not overdone. Everyone's heard Gimme Gimme, On My Own a bunch of times. So we want those lesser known pieces again. Your monologue should highlight your acting ability, and they want to see that, again, emotional truth, groundedness, and a sense of who you are as a performer and not just a character that you're putting on or imitating. For dance pre-screens, clarity and confidence matter more than advanced technique. So keep the choreography clean, fully committed, and make sure your energy reads on camera. And if you're not primarily a dancer, show your musicality, show your performance quality. They're looking for potential. On the technical side, follow all of those submission guidelines exactly. If they ask you to label something a certain way, label it that way. Check your framing, check your sound. When you're editing your files, a lot of them don't accept internal cuts or edits, but make sure you clip the beginning and the end where you're turning on the camera. Make sure you show that you know how to be a professional. And if possible, record in a quiet, well-lit space. Again, investing in that good ring light or external mic can make a really big difference. And we have to consider in our self-taping world, not just your performance, but also your presentation. And then finally, remember that for the interview or faculty-led Q&A, be ready to talk about why you love musical theater, what stories move you, what your taste is, how you see yourself growing as an artist, and make sure you're demonstrating that coachability, that curiosity, and humility. Some example supplementary materials. We're looking here at the University of Michigan School of Musical Theater and Dance. This is one of the most selective musical theater programs out there, and we're looking at their pre-screen process over here. So we've got 2 contrasting songs, a monologue, a short dance combo, and this kind of, again, helps them evaluate that full balanced picture. And then you also will submit your resume and headshot, plus the short written response about why musical theater. And this is also your chance to speak directly to the program. So note not only what drives you as an artist, but why this particular program is the one for you. And just know Michigan's faculty are known for their warmth and they're very observant. They want to see how you take direction and whether you bring that presence into the room. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Laura to go over some creative writing stuff.
Yes, thank you, Sajel. So creative writing, near and dear to my heart. I studied creative writing in graduate school. There's some similarities. You'll see some similar pieces of advice and options, but a little bit different in some important ways as well. For creative writing, one of the big things, right, is that you're deciding whether or not to study straight creative writing in a more workshop oriented environment, or whether you're going to be in an English department, maybe majoring in literature with a creative writing concentration or something along those lines. So you will certainly have to submit a portfolio, and that can be a mix of things. It might be straight fiction or straight poem, yeah, poetry, straight creative nonfiction, or it could be a mix of the 3. There's also hybrid forms and things like that. So there's a lot of variability as far as the portfolio requirements and what different programs are looking for. We'll get into that in a little bit here. There are BA and BFA tracks in a similar sense as there are in the acting and musical theater worlds, thinking a little bit more flexibility versus a little bit more focused on your craft. And similarly, deadlines can also differ from general admissions. Sometimes not though, right? If you're going for an English major with a creative writing concentration, you'll be on that kind of traditional track and deadline submission calendar. So some sample programs here. I first want to say it was actually very hard to pick which ones to have as samples because there are so many creative writing programs. There certainly are English departments in pretty much every school in the country, right? So you have a lot to choose from, and there's really, even within, let's say, the category of a BA versus a BFA or creative writing versus English, there's still a lot of choices within those categories too. So do your homework, do your school research. One of the probably most famous writing programs is at Columbia University. The thing that I think is pretty special about this one is your access to the MFA community, so to the master's degree students who are kind of in the program, alongside you, right, in some capacity. So you might have access to visiting writers who are there really to work with the grad students, but you get to work with them too. There's obviously going to be things happening on campus that are exciting because of that proximity. And of course, it's Columbia. And then there's also the New York, writing community and a lot of the networking that you get just being a part of and being like in that sort of cohort. So that's another thing to think about when you're choosing a program, right? Or what are those kind of networking opportunities and communities that you're going to be a part of? Um, Completely different flavor, Oberlin College, but a very interesting one. Oberlin has a very old creative writing program, been around a long time, and one of their I think most special facets is that you get mentorship. And so the one-on-one mentoring is something that oftentimes you're not getting until you're a graduate student, right? But in this case, you're getting it as an undergraduate student. You're paired one-on-one with a teacher, with usually, a professional working writer, and you're getting that insight and that feedback on your craft really, really early and much earlier than a lot of people, right? I didn't get that till graduate school. So um, that's an exciting piece of Oberlin's program. There's also California College of the Arts, so completely different here. It's a writing program within an art school. This is full disclosure where I got my master's degree. Um, and it's a really interesting environment because you are really the only sort of, we'll call it academic program within a group of visual artists. So there's a very interesting environment there. You have access to art classes and interesting collaborations with people in different fields. So there's a sort of, I think, just inherently creative and collaborative energy in a program like that. And they're somewhat unusual, right? A lot of art schools don't have writing programs. Um, I did want to include Knox College here. It's a hidden gem. A lot of people have not heard of it. One of the first colleges to offer a creative writing major. But honestly, there's so many hidden gems. So I think this is where doing your research and starting early with your research. I love to suggest, even to students in 10th grade, check out these programs, see what they're looking for. Almost like in some ways, you might be reverse engineering what you're spending your time on as a high school student, right? Okay, I know this program is looking for X, Y, and Z thing. That's what I'm going to spend my time doing. So have to mention the UC system. UCSB has a really interesting writing and literature program in their College of Creative Studies. The College of Creative Studies in general is just a cool feature of UCSB that not all of the UCs have that kind of little niche. So check that out as well. Um, Again, just a small sampling here to let you know what's out there. In terms of application tips for creative writing, you obviously want to be choosing your best work, right? But I think the question is, what is my best work and how do I determine that? So really get some feedback from people you trust. And I would say solicit feedback as widely as you can, right? So ask your English teacher, ask your friend, ask your mom, and ask your fellow friends who are writers and really start to I think it's good practice to learn what kind of feedback resonates with you and how to implement it and what sort of feedback is not helpful, right? Because you're going to inevitably be in a workshop with your peers getting notes and you want to be able to take in what's useful and ignore what is maybe not useful, right? So I think having those trusted readers and being used to getting feedback is how you'll start to fine tune your own ability to say, oh, this is one of my stronger pieces, right? You do want to revise, of course, and you want to revise thoughtfully, but you don't want to over edit the life out of your writing. So I find in my own experience, there tend to be sort of two camps of writers, those that say, my first draft is perfect. I don't want to touch it, right? Versus the ones who polish and polish and polish and polish until they're taking a comma in and putting a comma out and putting it back in again. So this is a lifelong practice of getting the right balance, but I think it's important to note that you don't have to have perfect writing, right? Sometimes it is that strangeness or that edge that's going to make your work stand out. So I think especially in our kind of chat GPT sounding writing world, right? We want to really like let our voice shine through. That's really, really important. Do read the program descriptions to make sure your portfolio matches the focus of the program. And that feeds into obviously the advice about school research. But if they're looking for a certain type of work and you're submitting work that's completely different, not a good use of your time, right? So start early, build your portfolio over time. This one I really like to underscore, read widely, right? To be a good writer, you absolutely must read. It's essential and non-negotiable. And don't just read what you like. Read things that are confusing to you or difficult or not maybe your go-to style or genre, right? Think of like voices that are outside your own voice, and that's going to ultimately make your writing better. I would also really encourage students, even if you're in ninth grade, 10th grade, submit your work to journals and to magazines and see if you can get published, right? Having a few publication credits on your resume, on your activity list is going to signal your seriousness, your professionalism. A lot of my students are hesitant to send work out because they're worried about getting the rejections. Obviously, I think with all of these programs, right, rejection is part of the journey. My professor in graduate school gave the advice that you have to submit 100 pieces of work, get 100 no's, and then you'll get a yes. So even to this day, I think about that when I send out my work. And last note on this, I'll say, is just to make your own opportunities as well, right? Create a Substack for yourself, create a do people still do Medium? You know, have a Medium account, right? Like find a way to get your work out into the world. You can link those in portfolios and additional information, and it shows that you're a working, practicing writer who's serious about your craft. And they really want that, right? You can't just say you're a writer and have nothing to back it up. So that's an important piece of it. Okay. Some sample supplementary materials. The writing is interesting. I will just note there are plenty of writing programs that will actually not ask for supplementary materials. So that is an interesting thing to pay attention to when you're looking at programs. This particular example is for the UCSB program. And I chose this one because they have a range of things they're asking for, right? They want you to introduce yourself, give them your background, your interests, and your goals. I really like this next one. Reflect on a recent reading experience that shaped your view of literature, life, or language, right? And this really has to have some oomph behind it. So you really want to be able to speak to something that you have read that really did move you. And that goes back to my advice from the other slide, right? Just have some authentic answers to this ready to go. Don't go frantically reading books, right, when you're in the middle of your application process. Describe your writing life so far. What motivates you? How have you pursued it in and out of school? One of the things I like to do, what I was just speaking about in terms of reverse engineering, right? It's helpful to see what programs are asking you to write about because it signals what they value. So they want to know, what have you done in and out of school to enhance your writing life? And so you can ask yourself as a younger student, 9th, 10th, 11th grade, what am I doing, right, to build my writing life? And that's a really worthwhile thing to reflect on and can guide decisions, right? Should I join the school paper? Should I start this literary magazine? Should I, um, you know, send my work out? So thinking about that question is a good one to guide you. And then sharing what kind of work you hope to do within the CCS writing and literature community. So having a bit of a vision too. What kind of writer am I? What themes am I concerned about? What is my work about, right? Being able to articulate that, really important. On top of all that, they of course want your writing samples. So 10 pages total, 5 pages of your actual creative writing, whether that's short fiction, nonfiction, poetry, drama, screenplay, or digital composition. And then they also want an expository sample. So a literary or rhetorical analysis, a research paper, some other type of critical writing sample. I have had some students who've had to write this type of thing from scratch as part of their application materials. But if you're working on something like this in class or as part of a summer program or something like that, just know that this type of thing is often asked for and hold on to it. Okay, so that was creative writing. Moving on to film. Film is Also BFA/BA as your main options, right? I won't spend too much time on that, but I think the big thing about the BFA is that it's production focused, right? It's the making of the films, whereas the BA is also going to really weave in a little bit more of that film history and theory. You will still be getting the history and theory in the BFA. I do like to say that, and you should hopefully want to get a little bit of that, right? Because that's going to inform your work. For film application materials, you're looking at creative portfolios of some sort. Different programs ask for different things. Almost all will ask for a short film. Some will ask for some combination of a script or a storyboard or even a short story. They may want other visual samples from you. Typically an artist statement or a personal essay about your filmmaking, and a creative resume that details your creative projects. As a film student, of course, you can have different focuses of your studies, right? So within either of the tracks of BFA versus BA, you could be focusing on directing, cinematography, editing, screenwriting, or film studies. Some sample film programs. Some of these are probably looking familiar at this point. We've got USC as obviously one of the really big ones, industry leading programs for sure. A lot of hands-on training. You're obviously right in LA, which is important for internships. I've had all my students who go to USC have ended up working on really cool things out in LA, which is always fun to see. We've also got NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, another very prestigious program, very focused on the craft of directing, right? Chapman, Dodge at Chapman is a really amazing program. Sometimes it's sort of buried in Chapman and people don't always know it's there, but it's a very, very, you know, prestigious, rigorous film program. Amazing facilities. My students who go to tour and visit always have an amazing time and come back very excited. Back to Sajel's point too, in terms of visiting and talking to students, I think with film, it's really key to visit. I would recommend it with all programs, but I think with film in particular, you want to see the film studios, right? You want to see the equipment you're going to be using. You want to see the studio. What does it look like? What kind of cameras are you shooting on, right? That might really kind of shift your opinion. We've got LMU, another excellent option out here in California. We've got BA and BFA options there. These last two, Wesleyan and Bard, are interesting and a little unusual, right? In that they are liberal arts schools with film departments. So they're similar but different. Wesleyan's is a BA in film studies, definitely has a very rigorous academic component to it. So there's going to be a lot of the history and the theory, but you are making films. When I work with students on building out a film school list, a lot of them want to like sort of steer clear of the film studies because they're worried they aren't going to get the opportunity to make films, but I just want to assure people that you still get to make films. It just has like a different focus, and there is that academic piece a little bit more heavily present. Bard College, which full disclosure was my undergraduate studies in film, is a very much more kind of experimental and kind of artsy vibe, if you will. So their approach is a lot less of the pre-professional and the sort of industry and a lot more of kind of the art, film, and interdisciplinary collaborating with the photo department type of film department. So you've got everything, kind of the full range here of what you might be looking for as a film student. Some sample materials for a film program. I picked USC just because it's one of the more intensive and you can sort of see the range of what you might be asked for at other programs. They do ask for the cinematic arts personal statement. 500 words here, so almost as long as your Common App personal statement, if you're familiar with that. You're wanting to really share your creativity and your vision, but you're also wanting to not just have it be about film. So USC makes a point of saying, please do not just tell us about how much you love film and how much you want to be a filmmaker. They kind of actively discourage that. And they want you to tell a little bit more of a full story of you and how that has influenced your storytelling style and the types of things that you find important as a filmmaker. They're also asking you for a writing sample. So kind of a fun formal constraint they give you here of having either a 4-minute dialogue-free film or a 2-person dialogue scene in a screenplay format. Again, long-ish, right? 400 words. Your creative portfolio list is going to be a record of all of your creative work, not just film. And this is pretty simple. This is essentially a resume, but you can think a little bit more broadly than just film and include anything helping your friends on their projects, other types of creative work that you do, and so on. And it keeps going. So there's more. The creative team question, again, another around 500-word written piece. And they're asking you to talk about a collaboration that was difficult and what you learned from it and how you handled it. This is an interesting one. I find my students who apply to USC often have really good answers to this. And part of that is because they've actually been working in film, and it is a very collaborative space to work within. So they have a story and they're able to write about this really well. Simple, straightforward video introduction, 30 to 60 seconds, a single take, no edits, which I find to be an interesting stipulation, right? And a lot of the same advice would go in terms of what Sajel was saying with, the video. Think about being minimal, well lit, all of that good stuff. The media sample. So this is your actual film. And in this instance for USC, it's 2 minutes. They give you a prompt. Not every school does this, but in this case, USC wants you to make a short film of any genre on the prompt. This is the last chance. And you have to play at least 3 of the 6 roles, right? You need to be director, producer, writer, editor, sound, or cinematography, some combination thereof. And they also want you to include a 150-word critique of your film and a crew list. So you can see, even just narrating that, right? That is a lot of material that they want you to submit. And it's not just your film. And I think especially for film students, and I say this lovingly as a former film student, right? You get very obsessed with film and you might have a little bit of blinders on about some of these other components, right? You do need to be a strong writer. You do need to be able to speak about what's important to you as a storyteller, and you do need to be a really good and what's the word I want to use? A good collaborator, we'll just say. So that is USC. A few tips here for film applications. I've touched on some of this, but telling the stories that only you can tell. Don't be overly influenced by your film heroes, right? Don't try to make a movie like Christopher Nolan or the Safdie brothers. I feel like they're coming up a lot lately when I talk to my film students. Also watch movies. So similar to reading books, right? Making sure that you're watching sort of the contemporary movies that are coming out. You can speak to them and think about them. You also have watched older films, about film history, and you have that sort of diversity in your own viewing habits. It'll take you a long way. We talked a little bit about this in some of the other programs, but really read the directions carefully. It can get very overwhelming, right? Upload this, title it that, it can only be this long, do it by this date, right? But you really want to make sure you're following all of those instructions very carefully. Keep it simple. All you need is your iPhone, right? You really don't have to have fancy film equipment. You want to show that you have filmmaking eye, but you don't need the fancy bells and whistles. If you have them, that's fun, but you don't need them, right? Highlight your range, like I mentioned, right? You need to be a good writer, you need to be a good editor, you need to be a good filmmaker, all of that. Be reflective in your essays and really think about your creative process. They like to see that you're already thinking and working like a college student and like an artist. Plan ahead. I think we've said that a lot, but I'll say it again, and collaborate well, right? So switching gears over to dance. Dance and music are our last 2 this evening, and they will have a lot of overlap with everything we've said, but certainly with the drama and the musical theater. So some of this will sound familiar at this point, and I will not spend a ton of time on it, but you will, of course, be required to audition. You have your choices of BFA and BA. Your audition will include a mix of things potentially, right? Thinking through what your choreography is, right? Ballet, modern, improv. There's going to be specific video guidelines from school to school. There's going to be the early timelines. So a lot of similar considerations as you look into dance programs. I think the other thing about dance programs, similar to film, is that there's more writing in the application, at least in some of the programs, than you might imagine, right? Especially for Juilliard, there's quite a lot of writing involved. So here are some sample dance programs. We've got NYU. Is that NYU, I think, on every sample program list, right? We've got the Fordham Alvin Ailey program, the BFA. You see, again, with the kind of hybrid, the option of the BFA and the BA. We've got Juilliard, of course, University of Michigan again. And then Barnard, a little bit different from some of what we've talked about before. This is similar to the Wesleyan Bard example in the film section. This is going to be a BA in dance within a liberal arts school. So again, you're going to get that dance training and that opportunity. You'll be in New York, of course, so you'll have access to the New York dance community, but you're going to have your Barnard classes, right? Which is maybe the best of both worlds for certain students. The dance application tips here, these all look familiar probably at this point, right? Start early, follow your directions very carefully, know your degree type. I think with dance, of course, there's this incredible physical element to it. So you really want to be honest with yourself about how much time do you want to spend dancing versus studying, right? And how do you balance that? Part of the audition process too is you want to think about ways to stay grounded, right? And ways to take care of yourself physically. I think my musical theater students and my dance students are often exhausted by the end of the admissions process. And it's a physical toll too that you have to, make sure to factor in and take care of yourself. Wanting to show your versatility, of course, in terms of your auditioning, keeping everything professional with your resume and your headshot and your personal statement. We've talked about this a little bit, but I think this is a nice time too to just stress to be yourself, right? You really don't have to be perfect and polished. I think if any group of programs understand like humanity and imperfection, right? It's the arts. Like, so part of what you're bringing to it is your humanness. And this is true of all of these programs. Don't feel that if something messes up a little bit or you don't get it exactly right, that all is lost, right? I promise it's not. I've had many students tell me stories of, a glitch in an audition or what have you, and they went on to be just fine. That's not to say still keep the materials professional and polished, right? With that bullet point, but also don't be too hard on yourself if things go a little awry. They sometimes do. Stay organized, track everything, make sure you're on top of all of that. And Sajel's going to talk us through some sample supplementary materials for UMich.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that point was so great about your artistry being imperfect and embracing that. And I think that the first point that I'll talk about is with these auditions and the pre-screen process, the callback process, the faculty is trying to get that full picture of who you are again, not just as a mover, but a thinker and an artist. So thinking of yourself as that complete artist and not just a performer in one area can really help make you stand out. To quickly go over the video components, it's a 1-minute solo in any style plus 2 movement combos chosen from their posted options. They're looking for clarity, expression, and individuality, not just the technical difficulty. So again, you don't need fancy choreography necessarily, but they do want to see how you embody the movement and make those bold artistic choices. There is also a speaking video, which is really important. Michigan's faculty uses this to get a sense of your motivation, your artistic curiosity, what drives you to dance, what excites you about their program, and who inspires you. So this part is really your chance to speak in your own voice and show that genuine enthusiasm. On the written side, they ask for a resume, a headshot, and a personal statement that describe your training and experiences, but also your perspective. They're very interested in your background, your community, and your life experiences, and if this is shaped in any way, the kind of artist and dancer that you want to be. What stands out about Michigan is, again, their holistic process. So they care about that artistry, authenticity, just as much as the technique. And it's about showing them your full self. Moving on to some sample supplementary materials, we have our in-class kind of style audition. So you'll take part in modern and ballet combos, sometimes even improv, and the faculty are watching how you move, how you listen, and how you respond, in addition to any of your solos that might be repeated. You might be asked to reperform choreography for their submissions. So make sure you're keeping that solo fresh and ready. You may also have a short interview where the faculty ask about your training, your goals, and what you shared in your pre-screened videos. And, this is a relaxed conversational moment. It's a chance to kind of take a breath, step out of your performer mindset, and give them your honest, fresh perspective as a dancer. And, I think connection is so important, especially in this highly virtual world we're living in. So I think thinking about how you can make that impression, how you can show your presence, and have a routine for yourself to make sure you're grounded and you're open and receptive to having a true conversation and not just showing that performative side. Again, leading with that authenticity can be super helpful. And, as we've already mentioned, this process is very rigorous. So take care of yourself, but it's also a supportive one. They want you to succeed, and they're looking for self-aware artists who also know what keeps them balanced. So make sure you're thinking about that curiosity and passion and bringing that into the room. We're going to end here with some discussion about some music stuff.
Yes, music. So last but not least, right, we've got a few tracks here, a little bit different, right? We do still have the BA, the BFA. We also have the BM now, so the Bachelor in Music. There can be still similar distinctions between them, right, in terms of the focus on performance and technique versus one that is more broad and is weaving in the academic piece of things. You're, of course, going to have to audition in a similar fashion with the pre-screening, the audition, or potentially both. Your application materials will often be your music resume, a repertoire list, and a personal statement. And I would say that this one is quite variable. So it depends on your instrument and it depends on the school. So do be careful to do your research there. Similar to other programs in the sense that the faculty are reviewing the auditions. And it's often, of course, going to be a professor who's like in your instrument area reviewing your audition. So somebody who knows what you're doing, right? And can evaluate your work from their perspective. There will be earlier deadlines, and your focus can be either your particular instrument, maybe it's composition, there's music education, which is really interesting. And then, of course, there's going to be things that are more on like the production side at certain schools and certain programs as well. Some sample programs here, a little bit different. We've got UCLA's program. There's a BA and a BM option. There's going to be options to focus on performance, composition, music industry, and global jazz. There's a nice combination, I think, at UCLA where you're getting the conservatory training and that level of rigor, but you're, of course, again, in LA and things are happening, so that's exciting. We've got Northwestern, I think similarly rigorous, right? But also a lot of interdisciplinary things happening in the sense that there's some cool dual degree options. I had a student a few years back who was doing that. There's so much interesting stuff happening there. A lot of options just across the board in terms of thinking about performance, composition, and the music education piece. Berklee College of Music, right? A very targeted option, a lot of connection to the industry, very career focused, very pre-professional. I think in general, with a lot of the programs that we've talked about, that's another distinction to think about is how much are you wanting that pre-professional training and networking and opportunity versus how much are you really going to just immerse yourself in the world of art and not worry about that later, right? So it can really depend on which way you're leaning, or maybe a mix of the two, right? But that's going to help you choose a program as well. We've also got the University of Pennsylvania. I included this one just because I think there is, again, a really highly interdisciplinary like options here that are just curious. A few years back, I was working with a music student, and she was very, very serious, but she was evenly divided between she really wanted to study sociology and she really wanted to play the harp. And it was, you know, she couldn't decide. And a lot of the programs that she ended up applying to were ones where she could really do both. And so Penn was one of those places, and it was just interesting to see all the different ways you could put to kind of customize and put together your education there. So be on the lookout for that, because it was interesting as I was researching with her. We were discovering new things that I had never heard of. I was like, University of Maryland has what? You know, like, so there's a lot of really interesting music programs out there. Some sample supplementary materials for music from the UCLA program. You'll do your whole UC application, right? Which of course we haven't talked about this evening, but that's the PIQs, your activity list, all of that. You'll submit that, then you'll go and you'll have your supplemental application for the School of Music. This is going to include your personal statement and an unofficial transcript, 2 teacher contacts, but you don't need the letter, the actual letters from them. A pre-screening video audition, which will be different depending on your instrument, an optional performance resume. I think you said this, Sajel, but it's never really optional. So make sure you, whenever you see optional, do it. And then if you're a composition applicant, you'll also be submitting 3 to 5 scores and recordings. And if you are a finalist, you'll be invited back in January for auditions and interviews with faculty. So tips for music applications, similar to all the others, and I'll go through them here. Starting early, taking time to prepare, really researching your program type, right? And of course, your focus within those programs, following guidelines carefully, highlighting your strengths and your range, not just difficulty. I think arguably this is the most important point here, since we've touched on all the other ones, but you don't have to kind of show off the hardest thing you know how to play, right? Really think about who you are as an artist and what you want to highlight about yourself, and really what is your strength, right? Show who you are. Don't just try to be impressive. Recording in a quiet and well-lit space, of course, and testing your audio and making sure everything looks and sounds good. Keeping your resume and your repertoire list concise and well formatted. I think for my creative students, this is funny, I don't know if you've experienced this, Angel, but I feel like they have a hard time being concise. So they'll be like, here's a 20-page creative resume of all the cool things I've done, right? And it's understandable. You want to get all that in there, but picking and choosing more is not necessarily more, right? So really highlighting maybe the most impressive things, the things that show your depth and your breadth, but don't feel as if it has to be every last thing you've ever done. So be concise. Staying organized, of course, we've said a number of times, and then presenting yourself professionally during all of your communications, interviews, and auditions. All right. We got through. That is everything. So thank you for listening to all of that, and we're happy to answer questions if people have.
Absolutely. Thank you, Laura and Sajel. And as a reminder, if you have any questions, please go ahead and direct them to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. If you type in your questions there, that's where we will pull from. And we have a couple of questions to kick us off. All right, so the first one is there any sort of program that introduces high school students to conservatory style versus BA?
Like summer programs or?
I believe so. It doesn't say.
Can you read the question one more time, Lori?
Is there any sort of program that introduces high school students to conservatory style versus BA?
I think, yeah, I think maybe it's asking about summer programs. I can take it first, Laura.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely programs out there. A lot of these top tier institutions that offer BFA programs do offer summer programs where you can, attend. NYU, I know has several based on the studio system that you can go and get immersed in their training style. Now, I wouldn't say that it gives you like the true kind of experience of what a conservatory would be like, but it is a good way to see, is this something that you like? Do you vibe with the faculty? Is this a culture that you appreciate and kind of dip your toe in? So yeah, there are absolutely programs that you can look into for summer programs at all of these universities that have intensives that you can take over the summer.
And there are also some interesting programs, maybe not to necessarily to get a taste of the conservatory side of things, but just to kind of build up your portfolio and to think about, is this for me? One that a lot of my students have done that they've enjoyed is Interlochen.
Mm.
Um, and then on the writing side, there's a lot of really wonderful summer programs for writing at like Kenyon and Sewanee. So summer is a really nice time, especially I think for younger students to go and kind of test the waters and try it out and start to build their portfolio. I'll just mention that too.
Great. The next question says, do you have any advice for piano auditions?
Beyond, I personally do not beyond what we had in our presentation already, but I do think it would be about really picking the right pieces and showing your range. And I would also say, and I don't know that we mentioned this in the talk, but really relying on your teachers. So assuming you have probably a music teacher or, really for any of these fields, asking your teachers for their opinions and their assistance with those kinds of choices, I would definitely recommend getting outside input, not just deciding yourself.
Yeah, and all I'll add is, yeah, I don't have specific recommendations for piano applications or auditions, but I think the advice that was shared today really truly does a lot of it applies to all of your art forms if you are an art student or you're doing talent-based applications. So thinking with that intentionality, how do you want to present yourself as an artist? What is your taste like? Who are your mentors? And how can you prepare to really execute at your highest level?
Okay, great. The next question is, if I write a blog, is that something I should share with colleges, or is that not considered very serious?
My short answer is yes, definitely share your blogs. Um, I think it can be really exciting to show something like that, especially if it's something you've done over time. Um, the caveat to that would be making sure that the topics that you're writing about are appropriate and things that you would want admissions officers reading and that it's putting your best foot forward in that way. Assuming that the content is appropriate, though, I would say absolutely share a blog. It shows all sorts of wonderful things, initiative, creativity, DIY-ness, all of that. So I would go for it.
Okay, great. Next question. When we research schools, how do we know the quality and reputation of its programs? Is there a trusted source you recommend?
I mean, there's not like one source that I recommend. You can look at like US World and News Report. You can do Google searches of the top programs. I would say that typically the same ones will come up when you look into those things. For a lot of these BFA programs, in terms of like prestige, I think again, it's really about the fit too. So I think the subjective information that you can glean really comes from talking to current students, from doing a tour. I know that's not always accessible. So if you can't do a tour, then doing, a virtual visit with a lot of these schools that are definitely offered, getting in contact with any professors or any admissions reps that can really help you to gain a knowledge of what day-to-day life looks like in these conservatory programs. It is such a big time commitment. And I think going into arts, you are really choosing a path.
right? You are dedicating yourself to a career path. Obviously, you can change it, but it's more committed than I think even sometimes academic pathways, just because you are in a cohort, you are going through an audition process. It's very rigorous. So it's super important to consider not just the prestige of the school and those top 20 or so that come up, but also those hidden gems, many of which Laura kind of also mentioned and dropped in, knowing that there are programs beyond that top 20 list that you will see just again and again. But a lot of the ones that were here today that were highlighted are a lot of the prestigious programs. You can also look back on the webinar.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question says, do the performing arts programs intersect with one another?
I can say that. Yeah, it depends on the program. I think the short answer is, well, it really depends on the school. I mean, there are sometimes cross-conservatory collaborations that happen, but I would say that typically if you're doing a BFA program, you're going to be within your cohort. So that's usually a pretty small group of 15 to 30 students, maybe even 10, that they're accepting into a freshman class. And you are staying with that group for all 4 years. You are growing with them. You are collaborating with them. So you're within your department. You aren't necessarily on a day-to-day basis taking classes with those other arts disciplines. So I think maybe the intention behind that question might have been like, okay, can I do a little bit of each? And I think probably not in a BFA. You are really committing to that discipline again. However, that doesn't mean that you can't take those elective courses, right, that expose you to the other art forms that you might be interested in. Also, any university-wide productions or even school-wide productions that allow those auditions to be opened up to many different students who are not even in a BFA or an arts discipline major. That's another way you can kind of collaborate. And then, for example, like at a school like NYU, they have like a liberal arts foundation that everyone has to take. And you are in Tisch with a lot of other Tisch kids from the film department, from the dance department. You're all kind of together taking liberal arts classes, and then you go off and do your specific arts classes with your cohort. So again, these are questions that you have to ask the specific school.
Got it. All right, thanks, Angel. The next one says, when you say a program is competitive, what are the average GPAs they are looking for?
I think that really depends on the program. And we didn't really touch on this, but I think that one of the things to keep in mind is that your portfolio or your audition will be an extremely big part of how your material, your entire application is viewed, but it will not be the entire way it's viewed, right? So I think sometimes my creative students think, oh, it's okay that I have a lower GPA, or it's okay for me to take less rigorous classes. And depending on the school and depending on the field, that could be possible, but it's not a great thing to rely on. So we want to think at these top schools, they're still really looking at the academic piece of things, and that is still very, very important. So you want to do your school research and look to see, but I would still treat the GPA as a very important part of the process too, while you're also doing all of these other things.
Great. There's a couple more. Do you have suggestions for finding scholarships for these types of programs?
A lot of schools offer merit scholarships that you are automatically in consideration for if you are applying or if you are submitting your application. But then there are also school-specific scholarships or honors programs and stuff like that that you'll have to look into school by school. So my short answer is there is no short answer, and you're going to have to kind of do the research and look school by school to make sure you're not missing any of those key earlier scholarship deadlines if the school has them for merit and for talent. There are also, I would recommend for all art students, there's so many outside scholarships based on your talent, and you can use your talent, use your audition samples and your work to submit to those outside scholarships and possibly get some money just based on your talent that has nothing to do with the actual school. So that is something that you should look into as well.
Okay, great. There's another question which I can answer, asking if the webinar will be shared, and we will send this link to Beacon once we have it available. So yes. And then looks like the last question here. Any advice for finding a school with a strong alumni network, specifically that is active in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think finding schools, looking at their location, right? Looking at so like any schools that are in the key hubs of entertainment, or it depends on what art form, right? But like let's say for acting or for musical theater, if you're in New York, or if the school is in Los Angeles, those are or near like a great theater, even in proximity. Sometimes schools have relationships with local theaters, and if that is already built in, that gives you a great pathway for industry connections. I would also say like looking at what their graduates are doing. So when you are studying, or you're not studying, but when you're researching schools, literally looking up like alumni from these schools. Where have they gone in the past couple of years? What have they gone on to do? Do they have students who are working right now, right? Are there students who are doing, or alumni who are currently doing things that you align with, and are going the places that you want to go? That's a great way to understand, and also asking about their alumni network. I think a lot of schools will openly showcase and tell you that they have a strong alumni network, and they are proud of those things. So I usually think the tour guides and admissions officers are happy to talk about those things if you ask.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight and spending your time with us here at Great Expectations. As a reminder, we do offer a 30-minute free consultation, so please be sure to reach out to us if you are interested. And if you have any other questions that did not get answered tonight, please also feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to pass your questions along to Laura and Sajel. And have a great night, everyone. Thanks again. Thank you, Laura and Sajel, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.